Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I'm going to be covering the best teams for free-to-play players at every single point in the story. I'm also going to be giving you guys a few tips on how to play these teams so that you guys can absolutely blitz the campaign with no issues at all. Now, fortunately in Star Rail, the free-to-play units are actually some of the best units in the game, and I'm not even overstating that. Even as a spender, I'm going to be leveling them up myself. They are honestly just that good. Now, we're going to be avoiding any story spoilers in this video, but I will be talking about specific points in which the game where you do acquire certain units. So we're going to be breaking it up here. So you can see here, using this little tier list template here, the first 3 starting units that you get are in D tier. That's not actually D tier, it's just this is the first ones you get. So you get Trailblazer Physical, Dan Heng, and March 7th. This is actually going to be your starting team. When you very first get into the game, these are the units you'll have access to. Then when you get to Summoning, you will get to pull a few pulls, and you will guarantee get Asta on your very first pull. It is that way for everybody, and you will receive Serval from the pre-reg rewards, which everyone's going to get Servals, which is pretty good. So you have 5 units then to start out, and then after you complete your first simulated universe run, shortly after that you will get Herta. Now further on in the story, after you get through the Bellabog campaign a bit, you will encounter and acquire Natasha, who will be your first healer. And then after completing the Bellabog campaign, you will get Trailblazer Fire, a variant on physical, and probably the strongest unit as a free-to-play player, and one of the strongest units in the game straight up. You will also gain access to Qin Yu after completing your first few Forgotten Hall runs, which happens shortly after Bellabog. So that is kind of the free-to-play trajectory there in terms of units you can expect and when to get them. So the question is, what kind of teams can you make, and how can you construct the most effective unit in order to crush that campaign and make sure you don't get into any sticky situations or hiccups? All right, so my first piece of advice for everybody in the campaign is that you don't have to build an insane damaging team. It's much more effective to go full tank and really stack up the durability as opposed to going for maximum damage. There is no time limit on any of the fights. There is no stacking buffs on the bosses. The only objective really is to survive, and eventually you'll wear the enemy down. So if you can help it, you always want to go with a tankier team as opposed to a more offensive team, at least in the story. This is also true for the simulated universe, which you'll likely be using a lot of these free-to-play units in as well, which we'll try and cover as well. So your very first 3 units, as I mentioned, you don't really get an option in anything here because you are obviously playing a 4-man team and you only have 3 units, so you're going to use all of them, of course. So you're going to start out with Physical Trailblazer here. Physical Trailblazer isn't bad. It's a pretty good unit for free to play to start with, and it's going to be an effective AoE unit, one of the better ones actually, and it's able to break physical. Early on in the game, there is a lot of enemies who are very vulnerable to physical and a lot of AoE scenarios. So Trailblazer Physical is actually very good in the early game for breaking physical, and they're really going to be great. So if you notice that an enemy has physical weakness, you're definitely going to want to be spamming the skill of Trailblazer Physical here, which is going to be much more effective. Now Dan Heng here is a insane single target beast. He is one of the best hunt characters, and I don't expect him to be going anywhere anytime soon on any free-to-play roster. Even as a spender, most people are going to be likely leveling up Dan Heng. He is actually that good. He's not on Sele levels of good, but he is a pretty good unit. I would rank him as like a 4.5 star just in terms of his kit alone. He has good damage, he's the wind typing, which is scarce, and he also has utility in his slow, which is pretty good. And it's not too difficult to get Eidolons on him either because he is a free-to-play unit. Very good. He's going to be, you're pretty much forced onto your team, so no problems there. There's Dan Heng introduction there. Next up is March 7th, probably one of the best defensive units in the game by far. She is basically going to be shielding whenever you need it, and those shields last a long time. So in this early team here, you've got quite a good stack of defense. In addition to that, March also has a lot of crowd control at her disposal, as well as a little bit of damage here and there. So the way this team is going to play out is as follows. If there is AoE on the table, you're going to be using Trailblazer Physical as your main damaging unit and spamming their skill and using the basic attack on Dan Heng. If it's a single target situation though, and there is wind weakness, you're probably going to want to be using Dan Heng. So AoE, single target, not too bad there. Now on March, you're going to want to be maintaining at least one shield at all times on herself, but if you want, you can also place a shield on someone who has been targeted by an enemy. You'll see that as a reticle on them, or you can alternatively just put the shield on someone who's on low life. The shield is honestly truly massive in the early game. It shields for just so much, so overall March is going to be really good early. And if you're really struggling and you need to get really defensive, you can use basic attacks on both of your DPSs and just spam March's shield every single turn to try and grind down the enemy with a war of attrition here. So this is a really good starter team, very good. And in the early game, you'll also have Himiko on your team for free for a little bit. She acts as a bit of a trial, but this is a really good starting unit here. And overall, March is going to be a huge carry in terms of the defenses, so do not neglect using her shield. It's very good, as well as the freeze. All right, so the next two units we're going to be getting is Asta and Serval. So Asta and Serval are great units here. Serval specifically is going to be a absolute monster free-to-play unit. So the question is, what does your team look like after Himiko leaves and you get access to these other units here? Well, you have some options now. So most likely you're going to be adding in Asta as your support now. So you've got your sustaining shielder here in March, you've got Asta who is your support, and you've got Dan Heng and Trailblazer Physical here for your 2 damage dealers. So the way this team is now going to play out is that Asta will be spamming her basic, March will be using the shields as we discussed earlier, and Trailblazer Physical will be using their skill in AoE, and Dan Heng will be using it in single target. You'll now have way more skill points at your disposal thanks to the additional Asta, and Asta can also be used to use her skill here to break fire enemies, which you may start to encounter, which is pretty good. In this scenario where you want to use Asta's skill, you probably want to use both of your other characters here using their basic attack so you can still maintain March's shields and have a good amount of defense. It's really important to maintain March's shields. I can't stress that enough. It's very important as it gives her a ton of damage and it also gives your team a lot of survivability and durability. But we also did get Serval here. Now this is kind of a situation now where you can start to swap and change. So most likely you're not going to be swapping out these two guys. They are just too great in terms of their utility and what they provide. So March and Asta are pretty much going to be sticking around until you get to the next character point, which is going to be Herta and Natasha. So March and Asta will just say that they're locked in for now. These are the characters which you can start to swap out. So most of the time, you're going to be looking at the weakness of the enemy. You know, if they're not weak to wind, you can swap out Dan Heng for your new Serval character here. If they're not weak to physical, but they are weak to wind, you can swap back in Dan Heng. Overall, if you're looking for the raw damage, which is the best raw damage team composition, this is the best raw damage team composition early. Serval, Dan Heng, Asta, March 7th. Because, you know, they just have the most damage. Trailblazer Physical is good for breaking. They're good for AoE physical kind of weaknesses there. But Serval is actually the better AoE unit. So an insane single target and insane AoE unit, this is going to be a pretty good combo. And this is probably what I would go with for the most part, unless you do actually in fact need to break physical, in which you can bring the Trailblazer Physical in when you need it. Now remember, don't forget to use those March 7th shields and only use Asta's skill if the enemy is vulnerable to fire. And then otherwise use her basic attack to really get those skill points for your 2 damage dealers so that you can deal big AoE damage or big single target damage. Next up, we're going to be getting Herta. So Herta is a pretty interesting character. Now, she's honestly not that good at damaging, at least in closed beta 3 she wasn't. Her damage is super low. Unfortunately, she also isn't very good at breaking either. March is actually a better icebreaker than Herta. Granted, if it's AoE, Herta can be very good. She does have her place, and once you start getting into farming calyxes, if you really want to speed things up by a few minutes, you can level up Herta. But overall, she's not the best free-to-play unit, so even when you do pick her up, I'm personally not going to be leveling her, but if you like Herta, you should level her up. She's pretty cool. You can get those spins, that Kadoos or time to 12s. It's not too bad there, but you're pretty much going to be sticking with the team we already discussed. March, Asta is locked in, then Serval and Dan Heng, or you can swap in Trailblazer Physical as needed for those physical vulnerabilities. All right, the next character you get is Natasha. Now, Natasha is an incredibly good free-to-play unit. She is phenomenal as she is our first healer, and you are going to want to slot her in immediately as soon as you get her. She is that good. So you're going to want to be swapping out March most of the time for Natasha, as March is good, but she is a preventative measure. She is going to shield someone before they take the damage. Natasha can allow you to take the damage and then heal it back, which is definitely a more powerful mechanic, at least in the early game when you're playing it out. So this is the team which I would probably recommend. Again, you can swap out the 2 DPS here for the physical Trailblazer as you need them. This is probably what I'd be looking at here though as a core team. Now, if you're getting into some sticky situations and you're finding yourself, kind of stressed a little bit for the mitigation, Natasha's just not cutting it in terms of the healing, you're getting smashed down, you've been leveling up your gear, you've been leveling up your light currents, you've been leveling up your characters, and you're still getting beat down, you can, of course, go for a double defensive setup. And this is one that I absolutely do recommend using against harder content, especially Simulated Universe. If you're versing Simulated Universe, absolutely go with the composition I'm about to tell you. So you can swap out one of your DPS or Asta to bring March back in. Now you have the preventative measure of the shields, and you also now have the heals from Natasha. So not only can you prevent it, but as soon as it does come in and it's more than March can handle, you can heal it straight back. Now, of course, this is at the cost of skill points. Natasha will need skill points to heal, March will need skill points to shield. But again, it's not a race. You can take as long as you need. There is no downside from taking longer in all of these fights. And if you wanted to get super duper defensive and super duper supportive, you can also remove one of your DPS here and add in Asta. Asta will have a supporting role here to give your 2 defensive units here some skill points, which you can use for shields and heals, but she'll also boost the speed of those shields and heals as well, which can get even better here. So if you've got a really tough wind enemy who is just absolutely just taking you to the cleaners, you can go ahead and use this team here. Danheng is eventually going to wear them down. Asta's going to build skill points and give you speed, and then you've got Natasha and March to keep everyone healthy and alive and freeze the enemy, and that's going to go really well for you. And this is a team which I think is especially important for Simulated Universe, specifically Simulated Universe 5. This is probably a team you may want to entertain using for that specific stage. All right, next up we get the all-powerful, the almighty, the king of free-to-play or queen, Trailblazer Fire. All right, so this support is absolutely something else. The unit is just absolutely just way more powerful than I think a lot of people realize. And when you get your hands on them, the very first thing you should do is try and get your Trailblazer Fires traces as much level up as you can, within reason. Get the ones that you actually use, don't level up ones which you don't find useful, and then try and get them some reasonable gear, hopefully defensive focus so they provide more shields. But as soon as you get the Trailblazer Fire, you want to immediately swap them and never swap them back. The Trailblazer Fire is so much better than the Trailblazer Physical. It's not even comparable, and they really do fill a massive void in your team. As soon as you get them, you're going to notice that your survivability goes from, bit touch and go to almost invincible. So when you do get Trailblazer Fire, you will probably want to swap out your Asta and play teams something a little bit like this. This is probably the teams you want to be looking at here. Now, you're probably thinking, how's the type coverage here? Do you have enough types? Well, you do have wind, you do have lightning, you now have fire pretty much permanently on your roster, and you do still have physical. Now, if you are worried about, for example, ice typing or something like that, again, you can swap into the triple tank comp now with March 7th. So basically what you've traded is a bit of speed on your Asta here for mega defense on your Trailblazer Fire here. So how's it all going to play out now when you get Trailblazer Fire? So Natasha is basically locked in, probably always going to be on your team. Trailblazer Fire is so overwhelmingly powerful, you're going to want to lock them in on your team. And situationally now, you can bring in a combination of Danheng, you can bring in a combination of March, and then you can also swap in and see as you see fit Serval, which is pretty damn good as well. So normally, when I was running through the campaign in CBT3, this is the team I would use, and if I came up against something really nasty like those Simulated Universe things I was talking about earlier, I would swap out Serval and I would bring in March for the big guns here. And that would be the mega tank team there, the triple defensive lineup. All right, so you do also get another unit here, Qingyu, who is quantum typing. Again, it's just going to give you more coverage. She isn't seen as the best unit based on CBT3, unfortunately, as she is kind of chance-based, but she's not bad. She's just not top tier. If you need quantum weakness and you want to break an enemy for quantum, you can absolutely sub in a Qingyu here, and she'll be decent. She's not an insane unit by any stretch of the imagination. She's not bad. Teams like this will probably be completely fine. You can also swap out Dan for Serval there. You can do as you see fit there. Definitely pretty good. You can also run a team with Chinyu as the main carry here, and then also March and get that defensive lineup here. All right, so this is probably the main team which you're going to be rocking though as you progress through World 2 and deeper into the story. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this team actually ends up playing out. All right, so you've got Natasha here, most likely spamming her basic most of the time, and maybe she'll use a skill point every now and then. That's kind of going to be how it's going to be going, guys. So you can see here probably about 6 basics and 2 skills, 4 skill points generated there. You've got your Trailblazer Fire, who is pretty much going to exclusively be using their basic because their entire kit is just completely enabled by the basic attacks on Trailblazer Fire. So they're going to generate enough skill points for all of your guys here to use their skills. And then on the other hand, you have your 2 damage dealers here. So the question is going to be, who do you want to use your skill on, your skill points on? Because you got a total of 12 here. You could probably go ahead and even use another heal here if you wanted. Who do these skill points want to go on? Well, we can use them on Servil or we can use them on Dan Heng. So if we wanted to use them on Servil, you would alternate between using the skill and the basic on Dan Heng here, and you could go ahead and do that and it would be pretty good. But if you wanted to use it on Servil, well, you know, you can alternate between her. It just depends on who you want to use as your main DPS. If the enemy is weak to lightning or it's an AoE situation, use all of the skills on Servil. If it's a massive single target fight and you really got to get the damage, or it's wind weakness, use them all on Dan Heng. So you can see here that if we do and set it up correctly, we can see that our team is perfectly balanced here if we just set it up like so. So we got our healer generating and healing, our Trailblazer Fire generating. We've got our main damage dealer here, Dan Heng. He's going neutral right now because he's not going to be in an AoE situation here. And then we've got our Servil using all our skills there. So whenever it comes Servil's time, use the skill. Whenever it's Dan Heng's turn, alternate between the basic and the skill. Whenever it's Trailblazer Fire's turn, well, you're going to use that basic, just bam, straight in, and the ultimate when you need it. And then whenever it's Nash's turn, use the basic if you don't need heals. But if you do need heals, top someone up, it's just fine. And this should work incredibly smoothly and very easily. Of course, if you want to add in March, you can absolutely do so. You can play her neutral as well. So the way you would go with that is that you would go basic, shield, and kind of go like that. And it will work just fine. You'll have a mega defensive team and you will be pretty impervious to a lot of damage there. So that's going to be my introduction here, guys, to the team building of the beginners. With all of the beginner units, I can guarantee you, if you use a combination of this team and then subbing in March where you need her, and you level up your light turns and put some reasonable gear on everyone, you will absolutely blast the story, no problems. Just pay attention to the typings and the weaknesses and use the characters who you have at your disposal to do so, and you will have no issues at all. If you guys have got something new or learned something new from this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Plenty more Honkai Star Rail content coming, and until next time, hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Cheers.